He spotted a head in the water, then heard the desperate bark. A German shepherd was drowning miles from shore. The fisherman jumped in. Minutes later, he saved the dog's life. But what happened next shocked everyone. Because that dog hadn't just survived, he had a purpose. And it wasn't over yet. The sun had just begun to rise, spilling gold across the rippling surface of the ocean. Daniel sat quietly at the edge of his old fishing boat, the hum of the motor off, the world around him perfectly still. This was his ritual, just him, the water, and the sound of waves tapping the hull. He wasn't after a big catch. He never was. For Daniel, fishing was about silence, escape. After losing his wife 5 years ago, the sea became his refuge, a place where the pain didn't echo quite as loud. With a thermos of black coffee in one hand and his weathered rod in the other, Daniel looked out across the vast blue expanse. A few seagulls circled overhead. He inhaled the salt air, exhaled slow. Another quiet day, he thought. No surprises, just peace. He reached for his bait box when something, a distant splash, broke the silence. He paused, squinting toward the sound. Another splash. Then, a bark? Daniel stood slowly, his gaze sharpening. There, far off, something moved against the waves, erratic, struggling. That wasn't a seal, that was a dog, and it was drowning. Daniel dropped his coffee without thinking. It spilled across the deck, forgotten. His eyes stayed locked on the dark shape flailing between the waves. The bark came again. Hoarse, desperate. This was no accident. A dog was out there, fighting the ocean. But how? There was no boat, no island nearby. He grabbed his binoculars and scanned the horizon. The German shepherd's head barely bobbed above the swells now, its movements slowing. It was losing strength fast. Daniel's heart pounded. Logic screamed to stay put. Riptides, the cold, the distance, but something stronger pushed him forward. He couldn't just watch it die. Yanking the boat's engine cord, Daniel swung the wheel hard, turning toward the splash. Salt spray hit his face as he sped forward, shouting to the dog, though it couldn't hear him. "Hold on, boy," he yelled into the wind. The shepherd vanished for a second beneath the waves. Daniel gunned the motor harder. He was running out of time, and so was the dog. Daniel cut the engine just feet from where the dog had last surfaced. He scanned the water. Nothing. Panic surged. Then, a paw broke through the waves, followed by the shepherd's soaked head. Without hesitating, Daniel dove in. The cold hit like a punch, but he swam hard, slicing through the current. The dog was barely conscious, limbs weakly treading. Daniel reached out, grabbing a handful of wet fur. The shepherd didn't fight. It simply leaned into him, too exhausted to resist. Daniel kicked toward the boat, one arm wrapped around the animal, heart pounding. Back at the hull, he struggled to lift the heavy, soaked dog onto the deck. Using all his strength, he hoisted the shepherd over the edge, then climbed aboard, gasping for air. The dog collapsed on its side, coughing up seawater, chest heaving. Daniel knelt beside him, pressing his hand gently to its ribs, still breathing. Barely. "You're all right now," he muttered, voice shaking. "You're safe." Salt water streamed from both of them, puddling on the deck. In the middle of the vast ocean, man and dog lay side by side, both alive, both forever changed. Daniel wrapped the dog in an old canvas tarp he used for covering nets. The shepherd shivered, barely able to lift its head. He looked for a collar, nothing, no tag, no ID. Just soaked fur and tired eyes. "Where did you come from?" Daniel whispered. The dog blinked, too weak to respond. He offered a bottle cap of water. The dog licked it slowly, trembling. Daniel sat beside him, scanning the horizon. There were no other boats, no nearby land. It made no sense. A dog this far out at sea? Someone had either lost him or abandoned him. Both thoughts chilled Daniel. By the time they reached the dock, the sun was climbing high. Daniel lifted the shepherd carefully, cradling him like a child. Strangers stared as he carried the drenched dog through the harbor. But he didn't care. He had no plan, just instinct. And instinct told him one thing. This dog wasn't just a stray. He was part of something bigger. For the first few days, Daniel did what he could. Warm blankets, clean water, soft food. The dog rested by the fireplace, slowly regaining strength. Daniel took to calling him Shadow, because he followed so closely. But then the strange behavior began. Shadow would growl at the window after midnight, fixated on the shoreline. During walks along the dunes, he'd suddenly stop, sniff the air, and bark toward the cliffs. It wasn't random. Every reaction was specific, focused, as if he were tracking something. Daniel's gut told him, this wasn't just a lost dog. He was looking for something, or someone. One night, as the tide rolled in, Shadow darted from the porch. Daniel grabbed a flashlight and followed him through the reeds. The dog led him to a narrow spot beneath the cliffs, an area Daniel hadn't visited in years. There, half buried in wet sand, was a torn piece of canvas. Shadow barked and began to dig. Daniel knelt beside him, clearing away the debris. Moments later, his fingers hit something hard. He unearthed a backpack, water-damaged, muddy, and zipped shut. Shadow stepped back, eyes locked on Daniel. Whatever this was, it wasn't over. Daniel carried the soaked backpack home, setting it gently on the kitchen table. Shadow stood nearby, tail still, gaze fixed. Carefully, Daniel unzipped it. Inside was a cracked phone, a damp notebook, and an ID card belonging to a young woman named Elena Morris. The handwriting in the journal was shaky, but one line stood out. Stranded after boat, capsized. Shadow swam off. I hope he makes it. Daniel's breath caught. The dog had swum for miles, alone, trying to find help. He looked down at Shadow, stunned. You weren't lost, he whispered. You were on a mission. Daniel contacted the local authorities, explaining everything, how he found the dog, the journal, the location. The dispatcher grew quiet, then said, Elena Morris was reported missing 3 weeks ago. We thought she drowned. A search team was dispatched immediately. Daniel gave them coordinates near the cliffs where Shadow had dug. The dog stood beside the officer's truck, alert and ready, as if guiding them himself. Everyone knew this was no coincidence. The German Shepherd had done what no tracker, drone, or boat could. He'd brought someone back from the edge of disappearance. Just before dawn, Daniel's phone rang. A voice on the other end, tight with emotion, said, We found her. Elena Morris, alive. Weak, injured, and dehydrated, but alive. Rescuers located her in a small inlet cave not far from where Shadow had led Daniel. She'd been surviving on rainwater and washed up scraps, too injured to climb or call out. When they found her, she was wrapped in torn canvas, clutching the edge of a rock shelf. Her first words, Did Shadow make it? The rescuers didn't need to answer. They just showed her the photo Daniel had taken. Shadow was already in the back of the rescue truck when Elena arrived at the hospital. The moment she stepped out, he leapt forward, tail wagging, body trembling with joy. She dropped to her knees, tears streaming down her face. You came back, she sobbed, burying her face in his fur. Cameras captured the reunion, but for Elena and Shadow, nothing else existed. A dog who swam for miles, a woman who survived the impossible, and a fisherman who just happened to be there, right when fate needed him most. The hospital room was quiet, save for the soft beep of monitors. Elena lay propped up in bed, her face pale but eyes shining as she looked at Shadow, curled at her feet. Doctors and nurses came and went, but he never left her side. When Daniel visited, she reached for his hand with surprising strength. You didn't just save my dog, she said. You saved me. Through tears, she explained how their small boat had capsized during a storm. She was thrown against the rocks and injured badly. Shadow had refused to leave her until she told him to go. He understood me, she whispered, eyes glistening. I told him to find someone, to get help. The weight of her words settled in Daniel's chest like a tide rolling in. Shadow hadn't just been a survivor, he had been a messenger, a lifeline. That dog had crossed miles of ocean, guided a stranger, and brought Elena back from the edge of death. Daniel looked at the shepherd, now asleep at her feet, tail twitching slightly in a dream. He's more than loyal, he said softly. He's something else. And in that room, it was clear. Something extraordinary had happened.